Here it goes.
You're welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Tonight we are going to have Jodie Wilson, our Assistant Director here at the library, speaking about Montgomery County history and give you a good outlook on highlights to start our history. Okay, thank you, Deli.
Alrighty, well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I hope you can hear me okay. Okay. All right, well, this is really exciting because as I look out, I see some experts here tonight, so that's awesome. I have an overview of the county's history and kind of some outstanding events and special people. It's obviously not intended to be comprehensive. I can't cover the whole county's history in depth in 45 minutes, but I'll give you some highlights. So also, if you have any comments or questions as we go along, it won't bother me a bit to start a discussion. And as I said, we have some experts, so if they want to chime in and add some other information to what I have, that would be fine as well. Okay, so beginning kind of chronologically, roughly chronologically, we're going to speak first about the Native American populations of the county. And obviously, as a lot of this happened in the prehistoric era, we do not have written records, and so there's not a lot that I really can say. However, I can tell you a couple things. I can tell you that Bridgie Brailsford wrote a book called Indians of Montgomery County, which I highly recommend if you're interested in that area, that you read her book, which is in the collection here at the library. And also, one of our library assistants, Emma Lashley, a couple of years ago, put together, Emma she had a degree in archaeology, and so she developed a presentation. I think it's an hour long, and it is specifically about Native Americans of Indiana. And she just did it a year or two ago, so it has a lot of really great updated information about like the vocabulary that surrounds Native American tribes. And if you haven't studied that in a long time, then it's a really eye-opening look, and I highly recommend it. The only other thing that I can really comment about Native Americans in Montgomery County is that Chief Peter Cornstalk does have a historical marker. There was a village called Cornstalk Village in Scott Township in southern Montgomery County. And there are some controversial points here. The sign itself says that he was a Miami tribe. However, Bridgie Brailsford devotes like 20 pages to just analyzing Peter Cornstalk in her book. And her perspective after all of that is that he was not, he was Shawnee. And I'm not going to take a side. I'm just going to say that it is something that is controversial. And if you'd like to read more and learn more about it, I highly recommend her book. She also has compiled a number of anecdotes that she got from various sources from some of the families that have been in Montgomery County since the beginning. And so it makes really fascinating reading, so I highly recommend it to you. Okay. So now we're going to just do a little basic information about the county itself. So the boundaries were defined December 21st, 1822. And the county was named in honor of General Richard Montgomery, who was a Revolutionary War veteran. He led an attack on Quebec City in 1775, and unfortunately he was killed in that battle. And this slide shows the county as it was in 1821, which was empty at that point. It was Native American lands that would be ceded by treaty. So from 1821 to 1831, and now we do have Montgomery County. And as you can see, there is a section that they will end up allocating to Fountain County, so that goes away.
Would you point on the map, because I can't see well enough to read it?
Sure. You want to see where the county is?
If you have a stick, just.
I wish I did. I don't, but I can use my hand. So right here is Montgomery County, and I can take it backward one too, because I think that's interesting as well. So these were lands that were given, well, they came from Native American treaties, and so they were allocated to the federal government, and then the federal government turned around and allocated them other way. Yeah, so that would be where it would have been. Okay. All right. So then, did someone have a comment? No? Okay. All right. So, so this was 11 townships when it took its final form, and I am told that kind of the arrangement of the townships and the shape of the county were such that settlers would be able to walk to pay their taxes at the courthouse and then return home the same day. Madison Township, trivia question. Anybody know what its nickname is? What they called it?
Quinine Township.
That's right, Quinine Township, because it was so swampy, there's so many mosquitoes, and unfortunately they had to use wild quinine to treat the malaria that ensued, which is never a good thing, but it's been drained and doesn't have that concern any longer. Okay, the first settlers to build a cabin in the county were William and Jenny Offield in February of 1821. And during their short stay in the county of about 3 years, Mrs. Offield did give birth to a child who was the first non-Native American to be born in the county. A Native American woman attended her, as there were no midwives or doctors nearby at that time. This is a photograph of the dedication of the Offield Monument in October 1881. The Weir family purchased it from the Offields, and it is my understanding it is still in that family to this day. And the first settler in what would become the town of Crawfordsville, circa 1822, was William Miller. And this image, it was a tintype, was found in the cornerstone of the Montgomery County Courthouse. This cabin is a later cabin, so it's not this cabin that I'm speaking of, but it is Mr. Miller's cabin at a later date. But the earlier cabin held the first court ever convened in Montgomery County, and also the first election in Montgomery County. Mr. Miller was born in Virginia in 1790, and he died in Crawfordsville in 1874. And although Crawfordsville gets its share of attention, that's sure, there are other small towns that are still in existence in the dates that they were platted. And then down in the corner, this is just a few of the post offices that were in operation in 1862. So you can see that a number of these small settlements have, in the years since, lost population and kind of vanished from maps. And I did find a very comprehensive resource that was just a book that someone had PDF'd that was a listing of all of the post offices in 1862 across the country, which was actually kind of interesting. Okay. So one of the earliest draws to Montgomery County was the land office, which handled land sales in west central Indiana. And it was transferred from Terre Haute in 1823, and it served here until 1853. It was responsible for selling land in 17 different counties, including Montgomery, Tippecanoe, Fountain, Benton, White, Warren, and a number of others. And then in 1853, any remaining unsold lands were transferred to the Indianapolis Land Office at that time. And this is just an example of one of the documents that they would have issued upon the original purchase of plat of land. Okay, and this is a sketch that someone has drawn, I'm not sure who, but it would have been similar to the first courthouse in Montgomery County, which would have been completed in August of 1824. In May of that year, Crawfordsville became the county seat, and it was incorporated as a town in October of 1834. In 1835, the population was 994, and in 1865, the town became a city at that time, and they had 2,316 residents at that point. And in this earlier era, I just want to mention that we have county historical books, but we don't often have a lot of documentation. So we're always looking for people who have any kind of family information, whether that are drawings, letters, ledgers, diaries, anything like that. So if anyone happens to have anything like that from Montgomery County, or even other parts of the state of Indiana also has an Indiana Memory Project. So if you have anything like that, please do let us know, and we can see about helping you to get a copy for greater, larger study. Thank you. Okay. This is the second courthouse. It was completed in 1833. It stood until 1875. And obviously at this phase, we're nearing the demolition, as evidenced by the lack of repairs being made to the structure. You can see missing panes of glass and missing boards from the building. And that would be appropriate because on May 6th of 1875, we have a laying of the cornerstone of the county courthouse. We had approximately a crowd of 6,000 people who showed up for the cornerstone laying and a speech by Lew Wallace. Unfortunately, it rained, so he had to finish his speech in a nearby hall, McClellan's Hall. And then the current courthouse was finished in 1878, and it was dedicated July 4th, 1876, which was the centennial. It cost $150,000, and it used Berea sandstone. And those of us who've been here a little bit remember that the tower had to be replaced because it was taken down during World War II, and it was replaced in May of 2018. A second draw to the county was the Crawfordsville Classical High School, which opened in 1833 initially as a high school and then finally used the name Wabash College in 1851. Before Crawfordsville was even incorporated as a town, Wabash College began its existence, and November 21st, 1832 is the date credited as the birth date of the college, while the town was not incorporated until 1834. And publicized first by the association with a founder of Wabash College, the son of Edmund Hovey was the first person to kind of commercialize crinoids. As I understand it, he sold them, I think it was like $5 for pounds and pounds, yeah. Yeah. But this one plate from Quarry's Bluff is in the library's collection, and it's upstairs if anybody is interested in seeing it. This particular one shows 17 specimens, including 2 species that are found only in Montgomery County, and 1 species that's found only in Crawfordsville specifically. And museum displays the world over highlight Crawfordsville crinoids. It's my understanding that the matrix causes it to be both stable and clear, and also it's easy to kind of chip away to reveal that relief. But if you're interested in more information about that, we do have a collector's guide to Crawfordsville crinoids, which was written by William Morgan and published in 2014. And we have that in the library collection as well as available for purchase at the Carnegie Museum if you're interested in that. this one I think is kind of interesting. So I always thought of the Athens of Indiana as being something that, about 1900, people were like, yeah, there's a lot of writers from Crawfordsville. Let's call it Athens of Indiana. No, that is not the case. This is a reference from 1836 and a 4th of July event. And William Compton says, a toast to the Athens of Indiana, may she be as prosperous as her citizens are enterprising and liberal. So this is something that has been going on for quite some time. And this one, a second reference, understanding that there very well may have been many references in between, but these are the only ones we were able to find today. In 1869, it seems a whole lot more reasonable to toast the Athens of Indiana following the years of the writers and the Civil War generals and other people we'll be talking about to come. That seems a little more rational to me. I guess they could just see their future. And the first official airmail flight was something that's now established as part of Crawfordsville history, although it started in Lafayette. We had the first official endorsed, official post office collection of letters. There were 123, I believe, placed in a sealed bag, and John Wise, who was a professional balloonist, lifted off to take these letters to New York. Unfortunately, the weather was not very good, and he drifted south. And eventually he had to jettison the bag of letters, and not only that, he had to persuade a crowd of women to take his robe and walk him into the area where he could safely land. I love that. So the mail does get through, so they ended up taking the bag to the post office in Crawfordsville and putting it on a train bound for New York. So it all worked out in the end, but it was a little dicey along the way. And speaking of long distance travel, Wayne Township's William Bratton got his start with Lewis and Clark. And we have a book front here. I just want to say I included this. Amy is actually with us this evening. That's fun. Yeah, so William Bratton joined Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery near Clarksville in 1803. Completed the entire journey and then was discharged in 1806, settling in Wayne Township eventually, and serving in a number of offices. So he is buried in the old Pioneer Cemetery on US 136. And clearly, as I have said, you could go into so much more depth, but I just don't have time to get into all of that. But I do heartily recommend a compass pointing home if you're interested in learning more about William Bratton. Okay, I love this graphic. This was created by the Indiana Historical Bureau, and what is even more impressive are our generals. So beginning at the lower middle and then proceeding clockwise, we have Major General Lew Wallace, Major General Edward R.S. Canby, Brigadier General Mahlon Manson, Brigadier General John P. Hawkins, and Brevet Brigadier General William H. Morgan. But we mostly talk about Lew Wallace. He impacted the world in multiple spheres, so there's so much to say about him. He moved to Crawfordsville in 1853, and in 1856, he created the Montgomery Guards, which were volunteer militia. In 1861, he was appointed State Adjutant General and commissioned as a colonel in the 11th Regiment of Indiana Volunteers. In 1862, he was promoted to Major General. He was 34 years old. Unfortunately, he was also relieved of command after the Battle of Shiloh. And again, the library's collection does have a book called Shadow of Shiloh, Major General Lew Wallace in the Civil War by Gail Stevens, which I recommend if you're interested in learning more about the Battle of Shiloh. In 1865, he returned to law practice and was appointed governor of New Mexico Territory in 1878, then U.S. Minister to Turkey in 1881. He wrote his first book in 1873, followed by Ben-Hur and the Prince of India, and he died in February 1905 in Crawfordsville and is buried at Oak Hill Cemetery. And his autobiography was published in 1906. He was also a member of the court that tried the persons that were charged with assassinating President Lincoln. He, along with the rest of the court, heard 371 witnesses and reached a verdict on June 30th, 1865, ending in the death of 4 conspirators, including Mary Surratt, who was the first woman to be executed by the U.S. federal government. And Lou married Susan Elston, and she actually published long before Lou did. Her first poem was published in 1858 compared to Lou's 1873. She was his lifelong editor and critic, and she was a standout in her own right as well. She wrote several books. She met Lou at her sister's home, and was known for a number of different writings that she had done. Unfortunately, those have not really aged particularly well. They were things related to travel or Christianity, and those things, they're not really in the common literature anymore. Okay. Dr. Mary Holloway Wilhite has quite a name in this community. She was the first female medical graduate from Indiana and the first female practitioner in the state. And she also devoted her care to women and children. She's also known for this convention that she organized in 1869. And that included Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, among a number of other standout women. Elizabeth Boynton Harbor. So she was born, not exactly sure when, either 1843 or 45, but she had a really interesting story. Apparently, President Charles White had told her that she would be able to be admitted to Wabash College. Unfortunately, he died the same night, and I have a feeling some people thought that was really suspicious. But yeah, nothing doing, she was not going to be admitted to Wabash College, and so she took that opportunity to make some money and wrote her recollections of the enterprise and gained $10. So that started her working toward women's suffrage, and she spent the rest of her life happily speaking, traveling, and writing, addressing the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. Senate, legislative assemblies, and she had a lifelong friendship with Susan B. Anthony as well. And several other writers. Caroline Virginia Kraut and her sister Mary Hannah Kraut were both writers. Both wrote for the Inter-Ocean at some time, both Chicago newspapers. Unfortunately, Caroline Virginia Kraut was not as well as her sister, and so Mary Hannah was able to travel and see the world and do all kinds of wonderful projects of writing and speaking. And Carrie came home to stay, and when Mary Hannah's health failed, then she also returned home. Mary Hannah also helped Susan Wallace to finish Lou Wallace's autobiography. Okay, and kind of changing the subject just a bit, we jump to sports, and Higgy Lambert, who graduated from Crawfordsville High School in 1907, and I think he gets the Persistence Award because he was a basketball coach at Purdue, basically from 1916 to 1946, and also the baseball coach from 1917 to 1946. He only missed 1 year for World War I, and then he jumped to being the commissioner of the National Basketball League during its last 3 years, from 1946 to 49, and he was instrumental in the merger with the Basketball Association of America to form the NBA. So he also wrote a book called Practical Basketball. He was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 1960 and the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame in 2006. He also is known for having coached John Wooden. And his little sister Eleanor has the best nickname ever. The godmother of the fashion mafia. I love that. So she left Crawfordsville and she headed to New York, where she was the founder of New York's Fashion Week, the founder of the International Best Dressed List, and the founder of the Council of Fashion Designers of America. So she did really well, and we have a really nice book about her that's available for sale at the Carnegie, and I'm sure you can get it online as well. Okay, so we've got Piggy, we've got Eleanor, and we also have Kent. Kent married Janet Snyder, so we've got a trio of related individuals here. But Janet Lambert was also the daughter of one of the founders of the Supreme Tribe of Ben-Hur, and she married Kent Lambert, and he was a career, he was a soldier in World War I and II, and he was also a friend of General Patton for many years. But as they moved from, station to station, she would write, and a lot of the themes that she wrote about were related to military service. So yeah, she wrote 54 books in that time frame, and she was very widely followed, had fan clubs and that kind of thing. She did very well. Okay, Morris Thompson. So he was born in Indiana, and as a young man he moved to Georgia, and he served in the Confederate Army as a scout, but he moved to Crawfordsville later on in 1868 and made Sherwood Place his home. He began writing in 1873, like Lew Wallace, but he's best known for The Witchery of Archery, which led to a revival for the sport. He was also involved in politics and was an 1878 member of the Indiana legislature and an 1888 delegate for the Democratic National Convention. And he had a brother named Will, and these brothers married sisters. So he was a co-founder of the National Archery Association in 1879, and he won personal medals in the 1904 Summer Olympics, and the team won a gold. But he's best known for his 1888 poem, High Tide at Gettysburg, which is considered to be one of the finest works of Civil War poetry. Okay, so moving to Merritt Nicholson. So he was born in Crawfordsville, and he was part of the Indiana Big Four men of letters with James Whitcomb Riley, George Ade Booth Tarkington, and wrote several books, including House of a Thousand Candles, which I read for class, and it was good. He was also minister to Paraguay, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and the Indiana Humanities today is still operating out of his home in Indianapolis. Those of us who are local also know that there's an elementary school here in town named Nicholson Elementary. Okay, and a murky relative, which nobody has ever quite proved to anyone's satisfaction. There's got to be some kind of a relationship, and it sounds like Kenyon said, yes, there is a relationship, but nobody else has been able to document exactly what that relationship was. But Kenyon Nicholson was a playwright and screenwriter, also from Crawfordsville. He studied in New York for a time, then came back and graduated from Crawfordsville High School. And he wrote a number of successful plays, but his best success, anyway, was Sailor Beware, which was sold for $76,500, and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis starred in that one. Okay, which brings us to Maureen Watkins, the playwright of the play Chicago. And it's an interesting story. Maureen always had a desire to write, and she was always very interested in that kind of thing. We even have handouts from the school with programs and different things and things she presented about. We still have that kind of documentation as well. But she was in the class of 1914, and at that time there was a murder, and one of her former classmates was shot to death by a local farmer. And I'm certain that that was just an incredible turn of events. And basically it sounds like the entire community, as well as most of the state, were pretty much tuned in to what was going on at the courthouse. And the star witness in this particular trial was a woman named Roxy Hart. There were accusations that the murderer had been involved with her, and she wanted to clear her name. So she was willing to become a witness, and she did testify in court. She was very lovely, she dressed stylishly, and she just handled herself with such composure and such confidence that journalists played it up really heavily. And as a result, the trial was so popular that on one day they turned away 500 people from the courtroom that could not fit in the courtroom because everybody wanted to go and see her. Maureen Watkins, Runyon, who was the murderer, was found not guilty. So that was no longer an issue, but Maureen Watkins went on to a career reporting in Chicago at the Chicago Tribune. And she covered other murder trials in her career. And eventually she wrote this satirical play, Chicago, which was based on her experiences reporting on murder trials in Chicago, but she took the name of the main character in the play Chicago from Crawfordsville's trial and named her Roxy Hart. Another name that is inscribed on the limestone blocks outside of the Crawfordsville Library is Duranier. And I honestly didn't know why that was because I had never heard of her when I first started working here. And I did the little Wikipedia search, and there was nothing that would indicate any kind of Montgomery County connection. So I kept digging. So she had written over 50 children's books. And I was able actually to reach out to the family and get some materials donated to the library. And I found out that she was 6 years old when she moved here to Crawfordsville, and her father opened a tailor's shop. Her father was a Jewish refugee from the Crimea, and he was an active socialist. He was an advocate and worker for the common good in Crawfordsville. And he worked to begin hot lunches in the local schools, founded the community chest. According to Beatrice's own writing, he once led a march on City Hall protesting the lack of work during the Depression. And aside even from Beatrice's achievements, there was another Freedman family member who achieved fame outside of Montgomery County, her little brother, Daniel Freedman, who became professor of psychiatry at UCLA and was a researcher on LSD and brain serotonin. He was best known for his role as the editor of the American Medical Association's Archive of General Psychiatry, which was and is the most prestigious psychiatric journal in the world. Also, from Crawfordsville are William and Sidney DeParis. They were the sons of Sidney G. Paris and his wife, Fanny Hyatt Paris. And Sidney, the elder, was in a band that played at the circus. And so he taught his sons how to read music and how to play. Wilbur worked with Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, and Duke Ellington. And Sidney also worked with a number of popular musicians through the 20s and the 30s, and recorded with his brother beginning in the late 1940s to the 1950s. And Lana Turner and Stephen Crane, so movie star Lana Turner, married Crawfordsville native and Wabash College graduate Stephen Crane, who had portrayed himself as a tobacco heir. Unfortunately, when Lana got to Crawfordsville, that wasn't quite the case. She found out that her husband's father actually owned a small cigar store and a pool hall. So less than a year later, they divorced, and Lana addressed Stephen's deceit in her autobiography, saying that he had just changed in her eyes after she realized that he was not honest with her. So, okay, Malcolm Ross was not born in Montgomery County, but he did graduate from Linden High School, and he married a graduate from Linden High School. And he graduated in 1936. He is known for a world record that still stands that he set in 1961 for the highest altitude balloon flight. So he was a Naval Reserve officer, and what he was being called to do was to test spacesuits for NASA. So on May 4th, 1961, he ascended 21.5 miles in a balloon to be sure that spacesuits that NASA had developed for the astronauts would hold. And it really is a fascinating story. He was aware of all of the risks, and he knew how cold it was, and that one wild wind shear could just break his balloon like a Christmas ornament. He was, very brave. As soon as he splashed down safe, Alan Shepard's first Project Mercury flight was given the go-ahead, and the very next day, within one news cycle, Shepard became the first American to enter space. So that grabbed the publicity away from Malcolm Ross, and so even in Montgomery County, his achievement has been largely overlooked. And then this is Victor Prather and Malcolm Ross. Unfortunately, while the flight was successful, on landing, when the Navy divers were beginning to recover them from the gondola, Victor Prather pushed his helmet back, and he slipped into the ocean and drowned before any of the divers could get to him. So it was successful, but unfortunately his co-pilot still did pass away. And the bottom picture is the presentation of the Hartman Trophy, and of course, in absence of Victor Prather, his wife accepted that. Okay, moving to politics. So Henry Lane, who married Joanna Elston, who was the sister of Susan Elston Wallace, he moved to Crawfordsville about 1834. In 1837, he won an Indiana House of Representatives seat as a Whig. In 1840, he won a seat in the U.S. House. He was known for his compromises to keep peace, and also for his role in the creation of the Indiana Republican Party in the 1950s. He died in 1881 in Crawfordsville. He was elected as governor of Indiana, but resigned 2 days later to serve as a U.S. Senator. And he was a Republican senator from 1861 to 67. James Atwell Mount was the son of a Montgomery County farmer. He served 3 years in the Civil War and had distinction for bravery and action. He was elected to the state senate in 1888 and then ran unsuccessfully for Congress in 1890. After serving in 1892 as president of an important vigilante organization, the Horse Thief Detective Association at the state level, he was elected governor in 1896 and served his full term. Mount was called upon to mobilize the Indiana troops to serve in the Spanish-American War. Richard Ristine was born in Crawfordsville in 1920, and he served as Lieutenant Governor of Indiana from 1961 to 65. Sue Ann Gilroy was born in Crawfordsville in 1948, graduated CHS in 1966, and was the first female Indiana Secretary of State from 1994 to 2002. Okay. And Will Hayes Jr. So many people have heard of the Hayes Code. He grew up in Hollywood, wouldn't that be interesting? But was born in Indianapolis, and he attended Wabash College, was a screenwriter in Hollywood at one point, and then moved to Crawfordsville, which is kind of an interesting idea. And he came here in '55, was elected mayor in 1963, and 67, and he passed away in Crawfordsville in 2000. Okay. And Fritz Eglin, he actually he wasn't born here, he didn't die here, but he did adopt Crawfordsville as his hometown. He was an orphan, and he was living in New York City, and he was actually playing ball in a park. And a Wabash College alum observed him playing and said, "Oh my gosh, this guy has got to play for Wabash." And so he just went over to him and said, "Hey, you need to go to Wabash." And he was like, "Weird." So the benefactor put him on a train for Wabash. Here he comes to Crawfordsville, and then the benefactor passed away. So here he is, without a bean. In Crawfordsville. So he worked super hard to make the money that he needed to get through school, and he was absolutely a standout. He lettered 10 times in athletics at Wabash, and he met his future wife, Mary Oda, who was teaching high school at Crawfordsville High School, and just instantly that family became a family. And Mary's father had left the family years before, and so I imagine, he as an orphan and them having lost a member of their family, I can imagine the bond. And from what I have read, he just embraced Crawfordsville as his hometown. So he went on to join the National Guard in 1911 and served on the U.S. border with Mexico, but then he entered pilot training. And that was where he belonged. He was a pioneer of developing the idea of using an airplane as strategically as an attack vector. So did amazing things there, and unfortunately was killed in 1937 when he was flying. And his son was essentially adopted by one of the it was like a union, a brotherhood of other pilots. And so they took over his payments at private school and made sure that he got everything that he needed. And then this is Mary Oda Eglin. She was right by his side everywhere that they went, and obviously a lovely artist. And she would do the portraits of the pilots at all of the different stations that they were sent to. And she passed away just a couple of years after her husband, and her entire family, her daughter married a soldier, and her son served, so they're all buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Jodie,
Yes,
Eglin Air Force Base is named after you.
that's correct. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. I intended to say that. Okay, so Adrian Marks was born in Ladoga. And as many of you probably already know, the USS Indianapolis was sunk without even a distress call being sent out in 1945. Apparently there was some kind of a reconnaissance plane that picked up some thought there might be something out there. So they sent Adrian Marks to look to see what they could find. And when they got out there, unfortunately it was, the worst thing that they could imagine. There were just hundreds of people all bobbing on waves, and they had been there for quite some time. Now they had been given strict orders never ever land in the open ocean. So they dropped rafts to groups of people, and then they kind of decided among themselves, the crew, what should we do in this case? And they decided, yes, absolutely, we will land. So they land, and it was a plane that was intended for landing on waves, so they were able to maneuver a little bit. So they went around picking out the individuals that had kind of floated away from the rest of everybody and lashed them to the wings of the airplane. So they were able to recover many and save them from drowning. The rest of them that were in groups, they waited until the Cecil J. Doyle could get there and rescue the remainder. After his service, he spent the rest of his life in Frankfurt as an attorney. Okay, Phil Ward. So this one was kind of interesting because this one has kind of evolved in modern times because it was disputed exactly who was in this picture. And it was just finally kind of decided in 2016 exactly who was in this picture. So let me just explain what was going on here. So obviously this is the battle for Iwo Jima. And on the left-hand side, we have troops lifting a flag over Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. And you can see that there's a machine gunner there, and he's not there just kind of to pose. At that time, combat was happening all around them, and they inched their way up this mountain and hoisted the flag on a water pipe. And it was just a small flag, but it was enough to just cause the entire island, all of the Americans are just cheering, and it was a huge morale boost, but it was super dangerous. It was not a settled situation at that time. Anyway, so there was a Marine photographer up there with them, and he took this picture. So it was like 10 o'clock in the morning that day. Unfortunately, on the way back down, the camera was dropped, and it was jammed. They couldn't open it. So later that same day, after the fighting had died down from that area at least, and that was a safe area, they were able to send up another crew, and this time they had a larger flag. So the second one that is now in the public domain that everybody thinks of when they think of the flag raising at Iwo Jima, that's the picture they're thinking of. That one was taken at like 3 in the afternoon. So it wasn't quite the same, and it's not that it was taken just to pose. It's not that. It was just a later time. It was a safer era. And so they sent an Associated Press photographer up with them. And that's why that one is the iconic one that everyone has seen. So if you can see the circle here on this left picture, there were actually, I think, at least 3 people in this picture that were misidentified originally. And in 2016, they finally realized that it was Phil Ward who was participating in it. And unfortunately, in this picture, all you can see is his arm. But that is Phil Ward from Crawfordsville, right there. And at the time, he was like 18 years old, so he's very young. But it's wonderful that they were able to rewrite the history and correct the errors that had been there.
Was it a different group, whether in the afternoon?
Yes. Yes, completely a different group, yes. Yep. Okay, and Puzzle Master Will Shorts. I like him because I like to say enigmatology. He's one of the, probably the only graduate in the world with a degree in enigmatology, but he also has a JD from the University of Virginia, but he's never practiced law. Been the New York Times Puzzle Master since '93, and with NPR Weekend Edition since 1987. He's kind of a popular culture kind of guy. Recently he donated 47 acres of his family land to Crawfordsville to develop as a park, which is really neat. Unfortunately, he apparently suffered a stroke in March, and I haven't been able to, see in headlines how he's doing, if he's returned to work or anything, but I did look into that. Wasn't able to find anything out, unfortunately. Okay, so lots of subjects, so much information about the county, and for years and years and years, library staff members, including Bridgie, and a number of others, have written a lot of information about all kinds of aspects of Montgomery County history. And the reason that all of them did that is so that everybody could participate and appreciate what we have here. So all of these books, if they're not available for sale, they should be in the library collection. So if anybody would like copies, the Carnegie Museum would have them. They're also online. And then also Christy and Chris recently wrote this book, Ghosts and Legends of Crawfordsville, Indiana. And the same applies for that as well. And they probably have their own copies too. Okay, does anybody have any questions?
The governor, I think it was Lane, who after 2 days became senator.
Yes.
Do you know, did he appoint himself senator?
Took the legislature.
Yeah, I was
It
thinking
was pre-planned.
okay.
That if we got a Republican legislature, he would resign as governor because he wanted to be senator.
Okay, that's, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Anything else?
What was the connection between the balloon guy?
He landed in
Oh,
Crawfordsville.
you just happened to land over.
Yeah, it was just a happenstance, but it was kind of,
It was the very first air delivery in the state.
yeah, I think it was the first period anywhere.
Where did you start out? In
Lafayette.
Oh, Lafayette.
No, we didn't make it very far, and apparently he didn't understand air currents. New York, Crawfordsville. Okay.
There's normally recording.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate your attention.